Welcome to another episode of Search News You Can Use with me, Dr. Marie Haynes. This episode is being recorded on Wednesday, November 27th of 2019, and it corresponds to episode number 110 of our Search News You Can Use newsletter. I think we have a bunch of new listeners. Each week we're getting more and more, and now we're getting over 1,000 listens to each podcast episode, which really blows my mind that there's that many of you that want to tune in to hear me babble on about my thoughts on SEO. In this episode, I'm going to talk a little bit more about this November 8th update. I know it didn't affect all of you, but for some of you, it was a really, really big deal. And so John Mueller has given us just this morning, I noticed this actually, I think the hangout was a day or two ago, some new information on whether we should be disavowing links. I don't know that I have the exact answer for all of you, but some of you are going to want to listen to this. There's more grief for recipe sites, so we're going to talk about that. And also some interesting news from Google on how to best use references. For those of us who are writing on topics where we have scientific references, we're going to talk about, people ask me all the time, should those references be in the article or at the end of the article? And so we have some new information on that I'm going to share with you as well. So as we usually do, let's start by talking about the latest algorithm turbulence. There really wasn't, as far as I can see, a significant update since the November 8th update. November 8th, again, was one that Google did not announce. I don't know that they've acknowledged that they did something, but they said it in sort of that way that doesn't really mean anything, where they say, well, yeah, we did an update. We do updates several times a day. So Google really has not confirmed that they made major changes on November 8th, but a number of sites are still seeing drops since that time. And as most of you who are listening to this probably have, if you were affected by the November 8th update, you've probably read our post on this and our current thoughts. Really not much has changed on our current thoughts. We think that a good number of the sites that were affected by this update were affected because of link issues. And I won't go into all the details, but if you were involved heavily in using reciprocal link schemes, so recipe bloggers who are parts of a link party where everybody links out to each other's recipes, travel bloggers who are getting many links in posts that say, here's the top 10 reasons to visit this city, and those are potentially paid inclusions or done in a way that is just not naturally earned. And I know that is not 100% explainable, and some of you are still trying to figure out, is this my site? If you saw drops on November 8th and you have that type of link, there's a good chance that Google has devalued those links. And what we don't know is whether that devaluation also comes with a level of distrust from Google. And if that's the case, then disavowing those links could help. But if we're wrong on this, because we have not had confirmation from Google, although some of the stuff John said doesn't contradict our thoughts, so we'll talk about that in a minute. Should you be disavowing? It's really, really tough, and so let's go into this a little bit more. I should say, in regards to other algorithm updates in November, there does seem to be a fair amount of turbulence. We couldn't really pin it down to one day, though. And so this is common every time Google makes some type of a significant change. It's not uncommon to see these tremors that happen, and the tremors may be Google tweaking the dials. I know that's sort of a naive way to talk about algorithm updates, but Google basically saying, all right, well, we changed this factor, but maybe we went a bit too far, and so let's make a few tweaks, and so you might see further drops, or you might see improvements, and it's not like Google, I think it's pretty rare that they just outright reverse an algorithm update, but they can make changes that can look like a reversal for your site. So we're not going to call any other dates in November at this point a significant update. I know Barry Schwartz had written a few things on Search Engine Roundtable about particular dates that could would also be updates. I want to say November 23rd or so, there were enough sites in our profile that I almost called that, a significant tweak. But really, a lot of those sites that saw changes were seasonal as well. Actually, let's talk about that. If you are a site that sells, that has more sales at Christmas time, and most of you, if you have an e-commerce store, this is probably the time of year that you love the most because, you're going to make more sales as people buy gifts for Christmas. And We've had a number of people reach out to us in the last week or so saying, hey, my product pages that used to rank really, really well have now dropped several places. So what is Google doing? And a lot of the time, this can just be normal due to seasonality. And I've spoken about this before, and we don't know exactly how Google does it, but they certainly do have aspects in their algorithms that can determine what users want. And at this time of year, more people are likely to have transactional intent than just looking for information. And so Google may be more likely to show websites that people tend to want to buy from. So if you've noticed that your product page, let's say you used to rank number 1, and now you're number 3 behind 2 Amazon pages, it might not be that Google's demoted your site or that you're doing anything particularly wrong. It could just be that Google's figured out that the majority of people who search for this query, they end up on Amazon anyways. And so part of the recovery from this could be to have a really, really good look at why do people want to prefer to buy from Amazon. And some of those things can not be fixed. For example, I'm probably going to buy a whole bunch of my Christmas gifts this year from Amazon. And as much as I want to support local businesses here, it's just so much more convenient for me. And so similarly, if I was looking to buy, if I've got 30 different things I'm going to buy on Amazon, I'm less likely to go looking at individual websites other than Amazon to go find those things. So finding, if you want me to come buy on your website and Amazon is what is best for me, what are you going to do to make it so that your website is actually seen as better for users? Some of the things that we do recommend is finding ways to give users more information, like buying guides, more reviews from actual users, more helpful reviews as opposed to, this was great, thank you. Finding ways so that people actually do spend more time on your website and are convinced to buy there. And so if you're an e-commerce store that's seeing some drops, and specifically in product pages, it may just be that Google's algorithms change in order to serve people with what they want to see. I was speaking with Glenn Gabe recently, and he coined it the holiday switch. And I don't know if specifically, somebody at Google says, oh, well, it's holiday season now, let's turn the switch on. It's probably not that simple. And I don't think Glenn was saying it's that simple, but we see it. Whether it's something that the algorithms just pick up on their own and they determine that, people used to prefer this informational URL and now they prefer Walmart or Amazon or Best Buy or eBay, one of those. I think it's probably that the algorithms start detecting that user behavior has changed. But it's certainly possible that Google has a different set of algorithms or something that they add into the algorithm to make the holiday shopping SERPs more user-friendly, perhaps. So I think some of the turbulence that we're seeing at this time of year is actually websites that, are at the mercy of Google's algorithms, just trying to figure out what it is that users want. And if that's the case for you, I don't think that disavowing links or changing technical things are going to make a massive difference at this time of year. But it's something that you could look at for potentially next year, is doing a huge overhaul on the content that you're producing, finding ways to make that content more useful for people. So, gosh, I traveled around a little bit there, and I think we had started talking about the November 8th update. So Glenn Gabe actually asked John Mueller a question about this update in a recent Help Hangout. It was just a day or two ago, perhaps yesterday, I think, as I'm recording this on Wednesday, November 27th. And so I'm going to read out Glenn's question. He said to John, you explained that there were several core algorithm changes released in November. After those rolled out, there were many different types of sites impacted, so several updates make sense to me. I'm going to interject here. We think that a huge component of this update is, like I said, links that come from link schemes that bloggers tend to get involved in, and that Google had devalued those. But there are other sites that saw changes that maybe we can't tie into those link changes. I did a little bit of a study into a hundred. Close to 200 sites, I think, that had reached out to us saying that they were affected, and over 50% of those were recipe and travel sites, which means there were other sites that were affected as well. And so going back to Glenn's question here, many smaller bloggers in certain niche categories were impacted heavily, like recipe sites. And when checking those specific sites, you could clearly see many unnatural links via recommendation widgets and other link building tactics. For those sites, is it even worth disavowing those links, as it really looks like Google just simply devalued those links? And that's the question that we've been asking over the last few weeks as well, because this comes with a lot of risk. What if we're wrong? I really do think that Google has devalued those types of links. But if you go and disavow those, and I'm incorrect in that decision, you could do more harm than good. And if Google has just devalued the links and you disavow them, you might just accomplish nothing other than you've wasted a bunch of time, or you've paid a lot of money to have somebody like me or somebody else who does a lot of disavow work to do that for you. So, is it really necessary? And what we keep coming back to is this quote from John Mueller from last year, where he basically said that, actually it was early this year, that if Google sees enough unnatural links pointing to your site, that they could deem your entire link profile as untrustworthy. And in that sense, there is almost a bit of a suppression put on your site. It's not like the site itself is particularly suppressed, but rather your links may not carry as much value as they would if Google felt they could trust your whole website. Now, John had a very long reply to this, and this is we've included the whole reply in newsletter. The important parts, though, here, first of all, he didn't give us an exact answer to Glenn's question. And let me just get to John's quote here, and sort of gave some generalized answers. So he said, in general, if you see a pattern of unnatural links associated with your site, then you want to clean those up. And he talked about ways to clean them up. So one would be to ask site owners to actually remove those links. I actually think if you're a recipe blogger and you're involved in a reciprocal link scheme, I had some recipe bloggers say to me, but we were told to do this because it's good for users. And I get that. I mean, I have clicked on some of those, like, hey, this chocolate chip cookie recipe is not really the one I'm looking for, but they've recommended 5 other recipes, and I'll click on that link. That's good. So here's kind of where I'm leaning right now, is if you have those types of links on your site, to actually no-follow those links. Again, is that going to help your rankings? Maybe if enough people do it, it's potentially possible, but I think it has the possibility to hurt as well. So this is a tough decision. What's interesting, though, is that John actually did recommend cleaning up links. And so, as I've been saying many times, like, he has confirmed that Google can see it as a negative, and it actually can hurt a site algorithmically if they have enough unnatural links. And what John said in his answer is essentially, you don't want the web spam team to look at your links and slap a manual action on you. That's another reason to potentially do this. He also commented that many sites, if you just start to look at your links now, thinking like, oh man, do I have unnatural links? And then you look at it and you see, I've got links with adult anchors, and I've got links from these spammy image sites, and all of this garbage pointing to my site, that's not what has caused you to drop, okay? I think it's conceivably possible that links like that can impact your level of quality if you were kind of on the edge in terms of your own links. And we do disavow those links if we're already in the process of doing a link audit. But if that was the only kind of link that a site had, we probably would not recommend doing a link audit for that type of site. So although John's advice doesn't tell us exactly whether we should disavow if you've had a November 8th hit, I still think there's a lot that can be learned from what John said. Again, we've summarized this in newsletter. I'm really, I think my answer here so far depends on scale. If you are a recipe blogger who has good links and travel blogger as well, I'm saying recipe just because these are the examples that are in my head, but if you have links that could be considered parts of a link scheme, and in particular what we think Google went after in November 8th is easier ways to get a bunch of people linking to you where those links really are only there because you were trying to build links, as opposed to like, even though you say, well, this is good for users, you wouldn't have been doing it if you weren't trying to get page rank, right? So if you have links like that, and let's say you just have a few that actually organically had grown, because some of the recipe sites we looked at, people said, well, I didn't build any links to my site, and I saw drops. It may just be that you were included in some of these roundups, and those actually helped you for a while, and now they're not helping you. And if you have not been purposely trying to do this, then probably disavowing is not going to make a difference for you. But if this is one of your main types of links pointing to your site, and you have very few other links that actually came because somebody said, wow, this is a really good recipe, I want to include it in my roundup post, then I really do think you should consider either disavowing those links or reaching out to some of the bloggers in your network to make a choice to all no-follow those links, or remove them completely, or add the rel equals sponsored or rel equals user-generated content tags. There's still a lot of confusion about that. Rel equals sponsored and rel equals UGC are just another way to use a no-follow link, and it helps Google to figure out more information. But from your perspective as a site owner, there's really not any difference as far as I can see. So I don't know if we're getting any closer. I'm not sure whether we're actually have been contracted to do any disavow work for any of these recipe sites. I really hope we have, because I would like to see what kind of results we get. So if you if you are a recipe blogger who, or any type of blogger that's been involved in reciprocal linking, if you're not sure, one of the services that we do offer is, we call it a link overview. And what my team does is take a really good look at your link profile and give you our opinion on whether it's bad enough to potentially either cause you a manual action or to cause you to be suppressed in the search results. It's not a full link audit. It's basically us trying to decide, should we do a full link audit? And in a lot of cases, our answer is, well, yeah, there's unnatural links there, but we don't think you'd benefit from doing a full link audit and disavow. And in other cases, we actually really do recommend doing a disavow. Let's move on to some additional Google news. There is a lot of new stuff that came out that I won't have time to cover in this podcast episode. So again, if you go to search news, you can use on our website, and this is episode number 110. And I should mention as well, we've got some changes coming to newsletter. They're going to be a few months down the road. I don't know if we're going to be calling each episode by number anymore. We'll see. We got a bunch of things coming on in the future, in the new year coming up. Google announced that they have new reporting for products results in Search Console. So if you're eligible for product-rich results, then you may find in Search Console that there's a new report there. And from what we can see, it looks like it's basically structured data and showing you where you have errors in your product structured data. So this is certainly worth checking out for those of you who that would be important for. I mentioned more stuff for recipe sites. This seems to be the theme of this podcast episode. Barry Schwartz reported that Google is trying out a new rich results test that actually allows users. So if I do a search for a recipe, and in Google search results, I can now click on a preview button, which gives me a preview snippet of the recipe. If I was a recipe blogger, I'd be really mad about this. As a user, I think it actually helps me. I make a lot of recipes from things that I find on the internet, and one of the things that I really, really dislike is having to scroll through like 18 pages of somebody's life story in order to find the actual recipe. And then when I find the recipe, it's jumping around because there's ads that come and go in the page. And that's really, really frustrating. And so I think it would be cool to be able to see a preview so I don't have to do that. And also to see a preview so that I can see whether the recipe has ingredients that I either like or that I have or that I can eat. I don't eat dairy. And so, seeing the recipe and seeing, oh, this is a recipe that calls for butter and I don't think I can replace the butter in this recipe, I might not click on it. This is going to result in fewer clicks for recipe bloggers as well. I do not think this is what is connected to November 8th. We've noticed that most of the recipe sites that were hit, it's not that they just... they mostly dropped a couple of places. I'm trying to remember now if most of them dropped their images. I mean, it's certainly possible. I might look into this a little bit more and see if there's a connection. But what's happening here is that you may be seeing more impressions or the same number of impressions in search, but you might be seeing fewer clicks. Here's the quotes on Twitter from Danny Sullivan from Google as to why Google did this. He said, "So the compact grid format can make it hard for people to know which recipes might be useful to them, such as if they already have needed ingredients at hand. This test is, it's a test. This test is meant to let people get more but limited info while still directing people to the recipe page through the link. If people have all the info they need, they'll continue to recipes as normal. If they want to learn more, they have this option. It's a balance between letting them get more info and making an educated decision on what to visit rather than sending to pages that might not help." He also commented then that this is an experiment and they might do other things with these options. There's responses to Danny's tweet that are saying, I like this. This is actually, I really liked Alan Blayweiss's response. His first response was more info presented well equals better click decisions. I like it. Sometimes, traffic is not just all about clicks. You're more likely to get conversions if you have people who really wanted to end up on your website. But for those websites that rely on ad impressions, this may not be the best choice. And then it looks like immediately afterwards, after Alan tweeted that, he also tweeted, alternatively, OMG, another antitrust lawsuit needed. I've had so many people ask me to be involved in lawsuits against Google. That's not my area. I do not want to be involved in suing Google. But part of me says this is not fair. Again, I feel like that's Google stealing my content. And then people could argue, well, I could just no index it so Google doesn't have it. Well, that's kind of like, cutting off my nose to spite my face. It's I'm going to be losing traffic. So this is a tough situation. And I mean, we know now that this is just a test. Maybe Google won't go forward with doing this from now on. And maybe this is something where recipe bloggers need to actually make a stink about this. Google does like to listen, and I'm sorry if anybody at Google is listening, and I'm just encouraging the entire community of recipe bloggers to reach out to you. But if this is impacting your traffic and you feel it's unfair, it might be worthwhile even tweeting, something just to voice your displeasure, because I think this is not a really good thing on Google's side. Let's see what else we've got here. Somebody was asking John Mueller about, there were some interesting discussions on pages that were blocked by robots. And this question was really interesting. Martin McDonald asked, if you have a page with 1 billion spam links, simply preventing Google from crawling it would prevent penalty from those links, right? Now, John has said, and this is interesting, he tweeted it, and he also said it in a help hangout, this idea that, and in his tweet, he said, links that are between indexed URLs is what Google counts. And he said, if one side is gone, the link is ignored. So, if you can get a link removed, that's obviously getting a link removed. If you 410 or 404 the page on your website that the link points to, that's the same in Google's eyes as getting a link removed. However, what John said is that if a page is blocked by robots and somebody links to it, that page still can be in the index. And so if somebody's linking to it, Google can have it indexed. And so that link can still count. So if you are trying to remove links by removing content on your site, just simply blocking that content in robots will not make a difference, but a no index tag probably would accomplish the same thing as removing the link. Similarly, somebody asked John Mueller about in Search Console where you see indexed though blocked by robots.txt. Why would Google show? So this person was seeing that these pages had a last crawled date on them in Search Console. So if they're blocked by robots, why is Google crawling them? And what John Mueller said is that that's not the date that they were crawled. It's the date that Google attempted to crawl the page. So just because you're seeing that Google crawled it, it actually may be that they made an attempt to crawl it. And why would they do that? It's usually because somebody has linked to that content, or you've included it in a sitemap, or for whatever reason, Google is trying to access that content. And if they attempted it and they realized through robots that that page was disallowed, then the date that's in Search Console would be the attempt, not an actual crawl of that page. Another interesting thing that we learned from John this week is about the Chrome User Experience Report for page speed. So back over a year ago, I think now, there was a tweet by Gary Ish just talking about this page speed update that was happening, and that Google was actually going to take into account what actual users were getting in terms of page speed. And if your users were seeing really, really long load times for pages, that could negatively impact Google's assessment of quality for your site, or at least your rankings for those particular pages. So the question that a couple people have had is, what if a page has an AMP version and also a regular version, a non-AMP version? So the AMP version really should be a fast version of the page. And let's say that the other version is a slow version of the page. Then what does Google do with that? If they're canonicalized to each other, does the AMP page trump the speed of the AMP page? Does that trump the low page speed or the long loading page? And what John said is it actually depends on what users see. So if the majority of users see the AMP page, then that's the speed that it's all kind of averaged together. Let me see if I can find. Glenn Gabe again asked this question of John back in January of 2018, so almost 2 years ago. If a site has AMP URLs for each of its core pages, which loads lightning fast, will the algo still use the responsive page speed? So he's saying, will this algorithm that determines page speed look at the AMP speed or at the speed of the actual page itself? And John said, in this example, since users from search would be seeing an AMP page, the speed of the AMP page would be taken into account. And then he actually said if your AMP page is slow, that it could rank lower. So really, it's whatever page people are landing on. So if people tend to be landing on your non-AMP page for whatever reason, and it's slow, then that can impact your ability to rank that page as well. Let's talk about these references and citations. So if this is really important for medical websites. So let's say you have a big long article about a medical topic, and we know that the quality raters guidelines tell us that Google really likes to see that your medical content is well referenced. And Gary Ish at PubCon in Vegas this year, when he was asked whether we should be referencing things and whether Google looks at that, he didn't tell us specifically whether Google is looking for references, but his answer was something like, well, if you're writing about carrots curing cancer, you sure as hell better have references. And so we do believe that Google wants to see that your scientific content specifically is as well referenced as possible. So when we say this, and we have, if you have not seen it, I have on YouTube a complete webinar on our recommendations for author, improving the EAT of your authors and improving, I think we talk about references in there. To be honest, We still have not done part 3 of our EAT webinar, which we should have done months ago. And this is talking mostly about trust. So if the information's not in that webinar, I will be covering it. Hopefully that's coming up in the next couple of months. We're trying to get me doing more of this stuff. So, hopefully I can teach you more on our understanding on EAT and whatnot in these webinars. But back to this idea on references. So people always ask us, should I have my references in the document or should I have them at the end of the document for anybody who wants to see a list of references? So traditionally, in traditional publishing, obviously, there's no links in traditional publishing. We would see a list of references, so we'd see a footnote. You make a claim in your article and you put a number, and then at the end of your article, you say, okay, number 1 was referenced from this place and number 2 was referenced from here. So John's answer when he was asked about this, and this is from a Help Hangout back in October. I'm a little bit behind on getting these tips, so I'm trying to do a little bit each week to get caught up with these. Somebody asked, from an SEO point of view, is there any difference between posting all external links and citations in footnotes? Like, for example, in scientific papers, instead of putting them in text, are there any guidelines suggested? Now, in newsletter, we've included actually I tweeted about it, the entire quote from John, and it's far too long for me to read the whole thing in podcast, but here's some interesting parts that I highlighted. When we find links within content of the page, within the extra context, I feel like we mistyped something here. When we find links within the content of page, within extra content, with extra context, it's a lot easier for us to understand what this link is about. And later on, he says, if it's a completely separate block of links on its own, it doesn't have clear anchor text, and that's something from our point of view that would make it a lot harder to understand what those links are about. Now, the question is, are we talking about what's best for your website or what's best for the websites you're linking to? And obviously, we want to know what's the best thing for our website. Now, for the websites you're linking to, it makes far more sense to have links in the content as opposed to at the end of the content, because Google looks at, and this may have even changed with BERT, who knows, but Google can look at the context of the words surrounding the anchor text in the link. And then what that means is that Google can have a better understanding that, you're referencing this scientific article about the use of glucometers for diabetics, and you've used those words, glucometers for diabetics, and that helps Google understand that what you're referencing is a scientific article about glucometers for diabetics. And so what John, he goes on to say, I would strongly recommend that just putting those links normally within the context in the place where users would find them, as well as where users will be able to use them directly. And he finishes with, I would try to stick to the trusted model of having links with clear anchor text on a page and those links being placed normally within the page itself. So when I tweeted about this, a few people appeared to be, a little bit upset about this because, traditionally in publishing, it's just accepted to put your references at the end of an article. I still think you should do both. There's a question with this, though. Some people don't want to link out to references because of the idea of leaking page rank. And I'm not sure I'm on board with that. The idea is that if you have a bunch of outgoing links from your page, it can potentially detract from the page rank on your page. And there are some people that very purposely will only outlink link externally to like 1 or 2 articles in each of their articles because they don't want to leak page rank. To me, this seems like a dated theory, and I don't think I've ever seen good evidence to support it. And so if you had 2 different links on the page, you had it in the context of your article and then also at the end, I don't think that's going to make a difference. Should those links be no followed or followed? I also don't think that makes a difference, although personally I would follow the links. I might even consider doing a followed link in the article itself and a no followed list of references at the end. Personally, though, I don't think it makes a big difference, especially with the changes that Google has made to nofollow, where it's up to them whether they want to follow these links. And they might say, look, this looks like they're referencing a scientific article, and so we actually want to consider this in our algorithms. We don't know whether Google does that. So what do we recommend? The best that I've seen are websites that have a link in the article itself, and actually a pop-up. If you click over that, if you hover over those links, some of them, I know Healthline is doing this now, that you can see the reference and also information about how trusted that reference is. So for example, if my reference is to a scientific article that's been quoted by hundreds of scientists in this area, I would call that a strong reference. If my link to a reference is from another blogger who has a personal experience, that's not so strong. It might still be important to include, but it's not as strong a reference. And so those types of things can help users have more trust that when you're recommending something, that you're really putting effort into determining whether this is a good recommendation or not. So those of you who have the type of content that should be kept up to date with scientific references, we would recommend that you find ways to link from within your content. I should mention too, if you use these sort of JavaScript pop-ups in addition to the actual anchor text in your article, you need to be sure that Google is seeing these pop-ups and that this content is indexed. And the way you can do that is just take some text that is unique to one of those pop-ups and search for it in quotes on Google. And if Google's not finding it, then you know that something's gone wonky with your use of JavaScript there, and you might need to make some changes. Okay, we'll do a couple more things here. I thought this was interesting, and it comes up from time to time. Somebody asked, again, John, about they used the URL removal tool in Search Console, and it was about a year ago, and now the URLs that they removed are popping back into the search results. So this is actually normal. When you make a submission to the URL removal tool, it's only temporary. And I don't know if it's always a year. I thought at one point it was 90 days. I could be wrong on that. But they do expire. So if you're using the URL removal tool, it's really for an emergency basis. It's like, oh my goodness, we have all these URLs indexed and we need to get them out of the index as quickly as possible. You use the tool to remove them, and then you also make methods so that they don't get re-indexed, such as putting a no index tag on them. So not everybody knows that. Another thing for the joy of the recipe bloggers who are listening, Google had talked about this new meta tag that you could use, saying max image preview tag. And if you're using this and you've set the maximum size of your image, your preview image, to none, there was a bug on Google's side that was actually making Google see that as a no index tag for the entire page. So if you've been playing around with using this max image preview tag and now you're finding that your pages are getting de-indexed, then you probably want to remove whatever you did. Apparently Google is on this and they're working on fixing it. Let's see. We'll do one quick, I don't know if it'll be quick, one Q&A question. If you want to ask me a question, the best questions tend to be ones about EAT, quality raters guidelines, and link quality. And I'm happy to answer those questions in the podcast. And you can find a link to our Q&A in each newsletter episode. If you go to mariehaynes.com/newsletter, near the top of each episode, you'll see a place where you can ask me a question. I can't guarantee that I'll answer it for you, but I do try to get, the really good questions answered. Somebody asked me this question about, I've been charged by my company with reviewing our backlinks. Lucky you. That used to be my favorite part of my day is auditing links on one screen and having Netflix on the other screen. And auditing, a lot of people don't like auditing links. I find it kind of soothing. I don't have to think too hard, and I don't know, I enjoy it. But most people don't, so you're probably one of these people. Reading through old documents, the company has engaged in some unnatural link building schemes in the early 2010s. The company made use of one of those JavaScript scripts that placed automatic attribution links whose URLs have a fragment beginning in hashtag IXZZ on, I'm Canadian here, ZZ, on copy and pasted content. My question concerns the latter practice. Does Google consider these automatic attribution links natural? There's a lot of things in this question, and I think I'd have to see the actual links to answer you with certainty. It may be, I'm not sure if what you're talking about is the hash fragment, and I remember a while back, there was somebody who I worked with who had this, I called it a link scheme, and he said, no, it's just a brilliant plan. And I don't know if this is what you're doing, but what he would do is have a page on his website that was like, I don't know, the perfect guide to whatever. And this page had like a lot of calls to action, a lot of sales on it. It was a very important page for this website that would make a lot of conversions for them. But what they found was that they could not get people to link to that page because people don't often like to link to commercial content. And so what they would do is they would make, say, an infographic that was really cool and people would want to link to it. And they'd say, hey, you can link to this at mysite.com / whatever the page was. And then there was hashtag infographic. And what that would do is if you went to the page with just that hashtag in the URL, all you would see is the infographic content. You wouldn't see the commercial content and everything else that was on the page. And what people found was that would actually get more links because people were, they were quite happy to link to the content that wasn't yelling at their readers to buy things all the time. And so the question is, I don't know if that's what your question is, if those links count. I think there's another component, so I'm going to come back to that. So I found some information, some quotes from Help Hangouts in the past, and something that was said by Google was, we don't generally crawl URLs with just the hash fragment. So if you have the hash sign and then some text afterwards, usually we drop that and only crawl the version without the fragment. In another place, it says, make sure that you have actual URLs on the page and not just hash fragments that you're trying to index. And Google has information on AJAX crawling, which I feel like I might be conflating a couple of things here, so forgive me. I'm not really an expert in AJAX. Stuff about escaped fragments and things like that, and I know some of you are rolling your eyes right now because I'm probably not explaining this really well, that's something that Google has deprecated. And you really, as much as possible, want to avoid building links in that way. Your question, though, is whether those links that were built to that content that's behind the hashtag, whether that can cause problems. I really think that Google is not seeing those links, but I could be wrong about that, and I actually do not know. There's really no harm in disavowing them if it's done on a large scale. If Google is ignoring them and you ask them to ignore them by disavowing, you're not doing any harm. The other question, though, is about, you said they're automatic attribution links. I'm wondering if this is one of those situations where I see something interesting on a website and I go to copy and paste it into my document, and when I copy and paste it, it automatically adds, you can find this content on example.com, and adds that type of link. If that's what's happening, those are unnatural links. And the reason being is that Google has said that it's perfectly fine to ask somebody to link to your content. But if you're putting a link in and it wasn't the webmaster's decision to include that link, then that's an unnatural link. Now, if you have a small handful of those, you could argue that, the webmaster could have just removed that link, and so they have the option to do that. I suppose you could make an argument that those are natural. So what would really make my decision if I was doing this link audit is the scale on which it's done. Again, if there's a small handful, I wouldn't worry about it too much. If there are a lot of these links and it was done as a tactic on a large scale, then whether or not Google is actually counting them, I would just ignore them. I think one thing that you could probably do if you're wondering whether Google is counting these is see if they appear in Search Console as links pointing to your site. And if they do, then they're something that Google's paying attention to. And if it's done on a large scale, and particularly as well if you had found a way to make those links keyword anchored, then 100% I would be disavowing them. I guess I shouldn't say 100%. I should see the situation, but it sounds like it was a link scheme in most cases where if we think it's a link scheme, then we err on the side of caution and disavow. And in our experience, it's very, very uncommon that we see a site that actually declines in traffic and rankings after we file a disavow. So, this type of thing I think would be perfectly safe to do. So we have tons of other stuff that's in newsletter. Things about some of your tweets might actually appear as impressions in Search Console. So we've talked about that. There's loads of stuff going on in the local SEO area. We've included some stuff about this Bedlam update, which was November 4th and 5th. So just before the big November 8th update. Joy Hawkins has some really good discussion going on in the local search forum. So we've covered that in newsletter. There's some cool tools as well. I really like the one that tells you whether there's unused JavaScript and CSS on a page. If you're trying to improve page load time, getting rid of unused scripts and CSS can make a big, big difference. We did that. I did that with one of my sites, just figured out, but I did it manually. I figured out which script I was like, I don't think I'm using this script. Let me try I used a WordPress plugin. If those of you who are interested in this, you can tweet at me and I'll find the actual name of the plugin. But I used a WordPress plugin that showed me or allowed me to disable certain scripts on a page. And it actually really dramatically improved my page load time. And we've got loads of other stuff. This is, I think, one of our best episodes of newsletter that we've had for input from my team. I was reading it and learning lots and lots of stuff myself. This is why I love newsletters so much, because in order for me to do this podcast, I have to actually stay on top of everything that Google's doing. So I think we're going to end it there. I want to give you just a cool quote from my 7-year-old. I bought a new pillow this week, and the pillow was made with bamboo. And my 7-year-old says, "You need this, Mommy. It's bamboo. And pandas love bamboo. And you love pandas." So my girls, they don't know exactly what I do other than I play around on the internet all day and I talk a lot about pandas and penguins. And they think that's pretty cool. So I think I'm pretty blessed to have this type of life where I can just babble on about Google and hopefully help a bunch of you improve your websites. So thanks again for listening. To those of you who are new at listening to this podcast, thank you. If you have any feedback for me, you can tweet at me, Marie_Haynes. And if you want to reach out to my team to potentially hire us for a site review, our contact page on our website is good, or help@mariehaynes.com is how you can reach us. And with that, I'm going to sign off, and I wish you the best of luck with your rankings.